Anna is STOP's youth organizer and restorative justice coordinator. Anna helped lead the 5-year campaign that just won removal of all police from Chicago schools. So huge appreciation for that. And I think we're going to get to hear an update on that and how Springfield is trying to mess with that. And Fanny Diego Alvarez is Director of Learning and Leadership Development at the Grand Victoria Foundation. She's also an SSA alum and student activist going back to her time as a Chicago Public Schools student. So please welcome Fanny and Anna.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Okay. Anna, yeah. Anna, do you want me to begin or do you want to go off camera? Are you good?
I can stay. Is it possible for me to stay off camera?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, we'll begin. So I'm really happy to be here today, and I'm also kind of nervous because, I get to interview Anna and Asha today, and so that's a pretty big deal. But I'm really grateful to be in dialogue with you, Anna, right now. As I was prepping for tonight, I learned that you were involved with STOP as a young person, and you attended Hyde Park Academy, and so I know you have a lot to share with us. But I guess digging deep into that, like, how would you say, can you tell us a little bit about like your experience as a young person organizing with STOP and also growing up in the South Side of Chicago and how that informs your work as an organizer now?
Yeah, so I attended Hyde Park Academy here in Chicago on the South Side, right across from where they are building this new presidential center that's coming. But it's just as far as my experience, just like growing up in Chicago and like just being a part of like this culture of folks like this is how do I don't even know how to actually explain it. Let me slow down. So yeah, just growing up in the culture in Chicago, like my family being from Inglewood, but also residing in Woodline for a lot of my life. But before I moved back to Chicago, because I got to experience life in St. Louis, Missouri, and then also experience life in Indianapolis with my father. So I did a lot of traveling as well. So I got the experiencing education happen in different places. So I got to just also just see a lot of differences growing up of the education that I received in those different states. I actually was in St. Louis at the time of um Ferguson, Mike Brown happening. So I got to experience that as well, like being a young person, and that being what actually motivated me to even like want to think about organizing. But it wasn't until I like actually moved back to Chicago, and I moved back to Chicago to like just help take care of my grandmother. And I attended Half Park, and I came, I want to say like late in my sophomore year, where I actually got introduced to what organizing was and actually how to move on, like what my feelings was during that time of like what happened during the Mike Brown situation. And then I also had a cousin here in Chicago who was 16 at the time. His name was Warren Robinson, who was shot at least 17 times by CPD. So that like also like really like affected my family, and just how like I viewed the world, like just hearing stories in history books, but like to live in modern day where police brutality actually existing for folks that looked at like me. And yeah, it's like it shaped how I view the world. So when I got to Hyde Park, I was kind of like closed off and shut off. But I attended an open mic that Stock had, and that kind of like pulled me in because I was an artist, and I I made music, so like the open mic pulled me in, but what kept me going to stop was like the relationships that I built. But outside of the relationships that I built, I would say it was also just the information and the learning experience that I was able to get with stop, because I want to say, like, I feel like my like the CPS education probably wasn't the best education. In general, I feel like I learned a lot with just experiences with stop, um learning about capitalism, understanding like just how the world works, and other different injustices that other folks were going through in different states, that I got to learn about. And then just like a lot of stuff that was going on across the world with like the uprisings actually happening is like what kept me like really going to stop, because like I was really figuring out like how to change the world, but I kind of like took a step back after high school, because I was like really trying to navigate life and figure out what life was going to be like for me, because I didn't go away to college, because I stayed in Chicago just to help take care of my grandmother. But I went to National Louis University, where I began to like study criminal justice, but in the midst of like all the work that I had like done and experienced with stop and like what was going on in the world at the time, which was like the uprisings with George Floyd, kind of like shifted how I seen what I was going to school for. I was learning a lot of things that I were aligned with, weren't necessarily I wasn't gonna be able to tackle the way I've seen targeting criminal justice system through like going into the criminal justice field. Like I wanted to be like in it, like like I feel like doing the real work with actually being involved with students, because I wanted to help young people be able to rehabilitate before they actually got to the adult prison system. And I feel like with stop I figured out like how to do that. And it was through like organizing, helping them like understand how the world works, and then also like using restorative justice to be able to meet them where they at, and really just be that support system that I wanted somebody to be for me when I was in high school.
Yeah. Anna, and that brings us to your work as an organizer, right, at STOP. And thank you so much for sharing all that you just shared. And I'm sorry for your loss. And I am very grateful that you're sharing with us today your journey and what got you to today. Would you tell us a little bit about the campaign that you've been leading to remove police officers from Chicago public schools? I know that there's been some wins, and then Marta alluded to some threats to those wins earlier in the introduction. Would you tell us the status of that work? Just talk to us a little bit about like what was the campaign and where are things at right now?
Okay. So the campaign is Cops Out of CPS, as we called it. We also called it like reinvesting to restorative justice, because the whole reason behind our campaign is to make sure that students get a holistic approach to safety and more relationship building, more restorative justice, and just like a lot of more more career programs added to their schools, because it's crazy how we could spend $180,000 a year per officer on having them in schools and not being able to actually keep students safe. Communities is actually what keeps students safe, but when it comes to like investing in like real safety stuff and just like stuff that students actually need to make them feel safe and actually make them even just like want to be in the school building in general, to be able to like actually get through high school and understanding the importance of like building relationships as well. Um that So in 2021, like we won one officer out in Hyde Park Academy, which got the school back. I want to say about, I want to say $80,000. Don't I think, yeah, about $80,000, where a restorative justice dean, but climate and culture dean was hired, and I think like that at the moment was all that was done. So like our next goal was to like really just remove the last officer locally in our school. But we were able to form coalition with other folks who previously like organized on removing cops out of their schools as well, and come together and just be able to like bring more folks to like understanding like why we were calling for the removal of officers out of our schools. And those folks like BPNC, Coco, Good Kids, Mad City, Chicago Freedom School as well. Actually in February, I want to say we didn't know that like yes, we did put pressure on the board, but we were there thinking that our opinion was just getting heard that day. And they actually voted to remove officers. So like that was like an awesome victory for us, because like we have been like fighting for over 5 years. Like this is a campaign that I worked on when I was a high school student along side Lanisa Young, who is now moved up with Jeanette Taylor. Like it was just like an awesome journey overall, like to finally start to get the students exactly like what they need in order to be safe, but just like resources overall that our schools lack in our home communities, and stopping them from having to feel like they got to go to outside community schools to actually get those resources. So right now the safety plan like has been released by the board, but it is pushed back that it is happening like at the state level. So we've been in contact with different legislators, and other folks like in the coalition have also been reaching out to make sure that like folks are pushing back against this deal, because it can be potentially like really harmful to all of the work that we did. But I want to say for the most part, like a lot of schools are actually happy with the budget that they have received back from removing an officer. And like a lot of folks are like really focused on, you know, wanting to have restorative justice in the school, and especially like ours. We like did a lot of pushing for like a restorative justice coordinator to be full time in our school. And like I want to say like that's one of the things that we are seeing out of this fight. But yeah, like the work is not done. I want to say like we still got to fight for more resources.
Thank you, Anna. I mean, I think that that is a perfect way to say it, right? Like the work is never done and there's always something else. Is there anything else you would like to share with us before I introduce Alex?
No, if no more questions, I don't think so.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's such a privilege to get to talk to you because you've been leading amazing work with young people in the South Side and throughout the city, and we know that you're making a difference. And we can see it in real time. Before we move to the conversation with Asha, I'm going to bring in Alex from STOP. He's going to tell us a little bit about STOP's biggest area of organizing with tenants. My understanding is that STOP has a lot that they're working on right now, and that includes demanding housing reparations from the University of Chicago. Alex, can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes, I can, Ben. Thank you. Hey, everybody. Alex Goldenberg, Director of STOP. Happy to be here. Yeah, our biggest fight is the CBA fight. The Obama Center and the development that's coming around it really represents an existential threat to working class Black families in the neighborhood and surrounding communities. And we are fighting to stay and fighting against displacement. We have been fighting to get protections from the city. In Woodlawn, we won an ordinance in 2020 that included some very strong housing protections, some of the strongest in over a decade. We are now fighting to expand those protections to South Shore. But we know that the protections that city government puts in place can only do so much, and that ultimately, in the day, we really need more housing to be built, more affordable housing to be built. And we know that the actor that has the money to do that is actually our neighbor, the University of Chicago. And so we are demanding that the university invest $1 billion in stabilizing the community that it has systematically displaced and destabilized over decades. And so that demand for U of C reparations, is a transformational fight that we are looking to expand and grow and intensify in the coming years, and I think will represent a real opportunity for the U of C to right a lot of the harm that it's done. I think the fight is really powerful because it builds on the work that Stop built around fighting for the trauma center. We built a community coalition that built power, that showed that the university can be moved with people power. And I think this represents the further development of that struggle and an opportunity to win some really impactful transformation. So yeah, excited to share it with you all and hoping folks can engage with us in these fights in the future.
Thank you. I think somebody was going after me.
Sorry, I was muted. Thanks so much, Fanny and Anna and Alex. Really brilliant to hear from all of you. And now we also get to hear from Asha Ransby-Sporn. Asha is from Chicago and was a student activist at Columbia, another school that has been in the news. She has since staffed many grassroots campaigns, including now Mayor Johnson's, as well as Bring Chicago Home and a Treatment Not Trauma referendum. So very excited to hear this conversation between Fanny and Asha as well.
Thank you. Let me pull up my notes here. So Asha, so happy to be in dialogue with you too. I know a lot of people here are here to also listen to what you have to say because people respect you and the work that you've led with a number of campaigns here locally, especially, but also in different parts of our country. So I'm excited to be in dialogue. Before we dive into the Chicago politics related questions, let's go back a bit in time. I know that you were a student at Columbia University. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience at Columbia and talk to us a little bit about the divestment organizing that you did there and maybe connect it a bit to the work that is happening across the country and that also happened at Columbia and began at Columbia with the encampments, pro-Palestinian encampments and divestment organizing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, hey everyone, thanks so much for having me. Big fan of Stop. I live here in Woodlawn and yeah, just happy to have the chance to chat with and meet some folks and support the really important work happening here in our neighborhood and city. And I think one of the many reasons why I value the work of Stop so much is because I also see it really as, the relationship between Columbia that I saw when I was a student and the surrounding neighborhood of West Harlem is really, really similar to that of University of Chicago here on the South Side. And, I see a lot of parallels in some of the organizing work that I was a part of in New York. So like you said, I'm Asha. I was a co-founder of an organization called BYP 100 that was a kind of leader in the movement for Black lives around policing. And that's where I've spent most of my organizing life. And now, like you mentioned, have led on a number of Chicago organizing campaigns. But I got started and really involved in the work of organizing after I joined a group on my college campus at Columbia called Students Against Mass Incarceration. And our first campaign was a student-led private prison divestment campaign. We learned that our university had about $10 million invested into two private prison companies. One, the Corrections Corporation of America, which is the largest and was the first private prison company in the country that really lobbied for some of the first and most impactful laws that led to the kind of explosion of what we call mass incarceration in our country. And the second was a company called G4S that operates private prisons, private security, and also checkpoints in occupied Palestine. So we as students ran, a energized organizing campaign. We built a base of students through petitions and lots of committees that did art and political education and research and planned actions, lots of protests at high profile events on campus. We built a kind of student group and community coalition. We used our student government as a stage. We pressured the university via administration presentations and lobbying, a university Senate resolution, and ultimately won and was the first campaign in the to get a U.S. university to divest from the private prison industry. But most importantly, our campaign kind of connected with community groups in West Harlem. The university at the time was really gentrifying that neighborhood, had bought a bunch of property, and then was also really collaborating with the NYPD. And so not only were we seeing displacement in terms of housing, but we were seeing increased criminalization of the surrounding neighborhood, and particularly of two public housing projects that were just north of our school. And in 2014, there was a big raid that arrested almost all of the Black and Latino young men that lived in those two housing projects. And so we, we're a part of a West Harlem coalition against gentrification that tried to sort of feed our prison divestment organizing into some demands around the university at that time actually had a community benefits agreement, but that was very, very weak. And so, ultimately much of that organizing was not as successful as what I've been able to see STOP do, here in Chicago, but that was a big formative part of my entry into the organizing world. And, I'm really grateful to have had those early experiences really instill in me an understanding of coalitions, of connecting specific organizing fights to a broader movement. We understood that what was happening on our campus was connected to what was happening in the surrounding community. And we also understood that what was happening in our campaign was connected to this broader movement that was happening around policing and mass incarceration and criminalization. And our issue fight was just one part of that kind of larger struggle. And so we were able to see how, our campaign was trying to be the kind of campaign that led to the next campaign. And I'm also really grateful that, sometimes we do against all odds actually win things, and to get to experience that as a young person was really important. And yeah, it's been a very full circle moment to see now really, really powerful student organizing, not just at Columbia, but at college campuses all around the country. And to be connected to, similarly like an alumni network of students that were involved in organizing and activism during our time at Columbia, who have supported encampments. The Columbia University Apartheid Divest Coalition that really led on the Palestine encampment that, I'm sure folks followed much of in the news, was actually started by some of my friends and classmates 10 years ago. After we had won our divestment campaign, they started that coalition to kind of revive a BDS movement on campus. And now it's that same coalition that is really mobilizing in solidarity with Palestine and against the genocide that's happening. So yeah, it's again really beautiful to see students and young people connect to broader movement, collaborate with community members, and understand really that connection from the campus to the local, to the national, to the global, and situate ourselves in these kind of interconnected systems as we make demands. So yeah, that's a little bit about how I got started organizing, and yeah, some of the parallels to the UChicago Stop connection and context.
Lots of parallels. Thank you for sharing. And connecting it to the movement in Chicago, like movement work in Chicago. Let's talk a little bit about our city. It's been a year since Mayor Brandon Johnson stepped into office. And some would say there have been wins, and there also have been some setbacks. And I'm sure that tonight's participants want to hear a little bit about what you're seeing and how you're processing this last year. Would you offer us an analysis of where the movement is currently in Chicago? And you can go broader too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I worked on the kind of movement-driven campaign to elect former school teacher union organizer Brandon Johnson as our mayor here in Chicago, and did that as a part of a program led by United Working Families that was really the driving force of the organizing part of that campaign. And I think it's important to name that happened as a part of a coordinated campaign to elect a number of progressives to our city council as well. And elections were like very far from what I was thinking about for a lot of the time that I was organizing. But why I got involved in that fight is, I think many years of movement organizing campaigns, and supporting organizing campaigns in different places around the country have kind of, taught me that if the left or if communities can't show our sort of political power, that there's just a limit to how much leverage we have over people that are making decisions that impact our lives. And I can see how if we can show that we can elect, unelect, and influence people in those decision-making powers, that they are going to care a lot more about the demands that we make of them. And so, that has kind of led me to believe that it's an important part of one of the many important elements of movements that we engage in that political space, and that it doesn't serve us to leave who's in office up to the status quo or up to the most, moneyed interests at the table. So before I answer your actual question, I think it's important just to say like a little bit of how I think we got there, which is really that the longtime organizing of communities doing work like that of STOP all across the city, labor community and political coalitions that have come together behind a shared agenda, really created fertile ground and built the groundwork and some of the organizing muscle memory that made electing a mayor and 19 progressives to our city council possible. And I think the why of that, beyond my personal why, is because those forces saw the negative impact of decades of neoliberal reforms, really driven by finance and real estate actors getting to choose who's in office in Chicago, and then setting their agendas that have had incredibly harmful impacts on marginalized communities across the city, from school privatization to the closure of mental health clinics and the destruction of public housing. Issues that are, why STOP has led the important campaigns that the organization has led. And that progressive coalition has, I think, seen themselves in some way, shape, or form as a part of a shared project of sort of taking back the city for the more equitable, in the face of that structural, set of harms that has been done over many decades. And so now that I'm using the word coalition very loosely, like people who I think are on the same side of making our city more equitable is like what I mean by that. Includes some people in governing power. And I think Chicago really is in like a time of the somewhat messy struggle of figuring out how we all relate to one another in a newer political context, and coming to some unity around, what that means, what's possible, what is, actually that much different about having progressives that labor backed in office versus not. And part of that is struggling to define the we of who is inside of a shared political project, defining the goals of what that political project is, and reconciling some of those differing views about what all that means. So yeah, I think inevitably elected officials will let those of us who hold big visions for making the world better down. And it continues to be our work to hold them accountable. And not all political terrain is the same, and good organizing strategy kind of sees that and relates to our targets accordingly. And so, I don't think that electing a mayor and, people to our city council was about deputizing one individual to carry out a vision, but to raise the ceiling on what's possible for us to win and to expand the coalition that we are kind of in collaboration with in our city. So some of the wins, we saw a win around one fair wage. So, eliminating the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. There has been important movement that was talked about in commitment to funding for mental health clinics and movement on the Treatment Not Trauma initiative. As we, continue to need to see that implemented, the wins around cops out of schools. And there have been like some challenges and setbacks. One of the things on that broad coalition's agenda was Bring Chicago Home. That's the last big campaign that I worked on. We, wanted to restructure the real estate transfer tax. So people buying properties for over $1 million would pay a little bit more in order to fund affordable housing. That went to a referendum on the ballot, had the backing of that coalition that was in office, but ultimately was not successful on the ballot. We faced an opposition campaign from the real estate industry and a legal challenge and all of that. So yeah, those are just a little bit of some of the things that have happened. I feel like I'm running up against time, but just to kind of end on, I want to see, I think, and the challenge I see for our movement here in Chicago is to really, as we adjust to new political terrain, to be coming together more in coalition, and to figure out not just how do we fight on our single issue fights here, but to really present a sort of coherent, longer term agenda about how we transform our city as a whole and how do we leverage public resources towards the public good in a way that makes the city more equitable, particularly for Black, working class, and other communities that have been the most harmed by structural divestment and neglect. And yeah, so I think, we put electeds in office, and then it's the work of movement to really be aligned and in coalition to take advantage of, when there might be more possible than maybe there was before.
Thank you. That actually leads me to the last question, and we still have a little bit of time. So the DNC is coming to Chicago, right? That's in August, and then we have a presidential election in November. I don't know if it's possible, but would you be able to tie some of what you just shared from like the pro-Palestinian organizing to our current politics in Chicago, this deja vu ticket with Trump and President Biden? Talk to us how we should be processing this right now. What can we do to prepare in the coming months? Yeah, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think in this moment it's important that like every stage we have to talk about national federal politics is including a demand towards our federal government to stop sending bombs and funding to Israel to carry out the ongoing genocide. I think that like two-pronged set of demands is really, kind of what even all the demands for institutional divestment and things like that should be feeding into a kind of national unified set of demands. And I think we should see the DNC as a stage for making those demands. And then, at different levels, and I didn't talk about, but have done some campaigning around weapons manufacturers, and the profit that they make from things like the situation in Palestine. But a lot of my organizing has been focused on budgets because I see that as a kind of reflection of values and priorities politically in the like allocation of resources. So I think when you see, our federal government sending billions of dollars to fund the occupation and killing that's happening in Palestine, that is in direct relation to the underfunding of public institutions, to the absence of universal healthcare and housing and transportation. Like that is a values choice that's being made. And I think, we can see the parallels when we talk about how we see 40% of our city budget in Chicago going towards policing. Meanwhile, there are all of these other, needs that people have that are being underfunded in communities. So I don't know. Yeah, that's a little bit. And I think that's what I think we should be talking about at the DNC. And as folks, I'm sure will be protesting. And it's just kind of on a bigger scale, seeing a similar status quo within the mainstream of the Democratic Party has been one of neoliberal reforms, like I talked about, and a kind of revolving door of corporate political donors and lobbying that has really normalized things like, approving billions of dollars of weapons sales from Boeing to Israel, despite watching them carry out an act of genocide. And so, yeah, I think any left interventions that are happening surrounding the DNC should really center that and should see, that conversation about military funding to Israel and weapon sales to Israel as a part of a broader project of disrupting that status quo.
Thank you. Thank you for connecting the local with the national and the international. That's really important for laying out the context. That I think we're out of time now. I'm sad because we could talk about a lot of things. I'll hand it over to, I think, Marta.
Yes. Thank you so much, Asha and Fanny.